Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the barn door restoration. Last episode, I got the upper part of the bulkhead finished off. This episode, I had planned to have the bottom all done and welded in place, but I run into some difficulties. I'm going to get to that in a bit. When I start to build panels and parts, I usually start by gathering up all the rusty bits, original bits, and matching them up to my drawings, my information I have. And there's different bits you can get off of these, like there's part of the lip of the floor panel is over here, and then over on this side there's a bit of the lip of the wheel well. So by looking at that and a few other details, I figure out where everything needs to be. And when I did that, this wasn't working out. In fact, it was showing that these wheel wells were in the wrong spot, wrong height. The heights weren't working. Maybe a bit nervous. So I started checking things, and one of the things I knew was this under seat panel, the lip on the front of it, I knew that was in the correct spot. And it's supposed to set about 1 millimeter above the frame rails, and it was good. So I knew that height was correct. And I thought, well, maybe I got the angle wrong or something. So I leveled my frame, the front frame, and this, and they were all level. So I knew that wasn't it. The other issue is maybe this frame rail here is too high. There's supposed to be 100 millimeters difference between the height of this front frame rail and the center. I knew I had it right, but I measured it anyway, and it was 100 millimeters. So that told me these had to be in the right spot. So I started looking at other stuff and looking at the B pillars. Now, this is the B pillar, and the bulkhead spot welds up here, and then the upper beam spot welds into it. So it just sets on here like that. So this is the right side one, and then I was looking at the left side one, and I realized that the bulkhead was welded on 7 millimeters higher on the left side than the right side. The other issue I had was when I was trying to figure out the height of the bulkhead above the wheel well, I was measuring from the top of the bulkhead here to the rusty bit of floor that's sticking out here. But this bulkhead was welded on 7 millimeters too high, so my measurement was 7 millimeters too big. So after looking at that, I thought, well, how was this put in here? Was the bulkhead crooked, or was the body on crooked? And I started looking at where the lines for the seams were in spot welds and realized they're not parallel to the ribs. So the old bulkhead was in there on an angle. Now luckily, the top of this bulkhead is the same as the later split. So this top edge here and this square beam are identical. So I looked at my 64, and the 64 was perfectly level on the bus. Forward and back is off, but there's level on the top. And I looked at how it welded in, because the B pillars are very similar. This shape here is the same. So where it welded, and it matched the right side. So this pillar matched up in the positioning. So that told me a bunch of stuff. And then on this wheel well height here is the same on all the splits. Okay, this panel is completely different because it dips down in, but this is the same height. In fact, the top of the dog leg is all identical between the two. So I was able to measure from the frame to the bottom of the wheel well, and then the wheel well to the top of the bulkhead on the 64, which had no damage in those areas. It's all original steel. And that's when I figured out, okay, well, I have this on too high, because I had originally taken my measurements from the left side, and then I used them on the right side. So it didn't match up what it originally was. So anyway, so that figured out this was all correct. I just needed to adjust my dimensions in my drawings. That reminds me, I uploaded the drawings for this bulkhead for last episode. I usually wait till I have a part completely done, and that's why I usually do that, is then I find something is off. So the drawings I uploaded 2 weeks ago, I had to modify. I did a revision to them. The height was off, so it's a change. Basically, if you use my drawings to build parts, you should always check to make sure that there's not a new revision since you downloaded them, because they do make changes. Most of the details are so small you'd never notice, but I'm trying to get them exact as I can. So once I had the dimensions confirmed with my drawings, cut a piece of metal slightly bigger than I needed. I marked out the ribs, and I put those ribs in with the bead roller. So the 3D printed dies to match the shape that's originally was on the bulkhead. Now I had to get those straight. And I made a little guide to do a few other ones as straight, and that kind of worked. But this panel is quite big, and there's no way for me to really hold it against the guide and crank it. So I made just a cheap table. I had some old plywood kicking around and made a table. And it actually worked quite well. I was able to set this on the table, hold the metal against the guide, and then just crank the bead roller and put the rolls in. I was using these dies, and I accidentally left them in the bead roller with the tension on them. And you can't do that with a plastic die because it'll dent it. So what I have is every so far there's a little tiny dent, which would be easy enough to dolly out, but because I ruined this sheet, I printed new dies anyway. Anyway, I rolled those in. Now my plan was to press in some of the details. For instance, the two lower ribs actually have a short section where they end, where it sits on this lip of that panel. So I'm just going to press those in, kind of little ending piece, and press the rib down. Now with steel dies in the press, that works great. With plastic dies, you can't do that, because what happens is the metal starts to roll down, and once the metal comes uneven, it'll push into the plastic die, push the plastic out. So that was a bit of a failure. So with the metal dies, I could have done it. With plastic, I can't. And to get the shape I wanted, because it is kind of a unique shape, I wanted to do it with the plastic dies, 3D printed dies. So the failure point of this is that I didn't try this stuff before I actually started on the full part. I should have did a test part. And I usually do that, but I was kind of rushing to try and get this done, and I didn't, so I should have. The other issue I had is this panel doesn't fit in my press. And also the press, the jack is in the middle, so even if it did fit in tight, I'd only be able to press in the middle, which doesn't quite work. You need to press centered on the die. So if you're putting a die in, it needs to press centered on it. So I thought, well, underneath this concrete floor is another room. I can put a post to the ceiling, put a jack in, I'll put some steel plate on, put the die, put some steel plate, put a jack in the post, and I can push them in. So the issue with that is when you're trying to jack on something that's narrow with a post, it's kind of a drift, it likes to tip. So you really can't get a good press doing that. You probably could with enough work, but... So what I've learned from this is I can't press the rib flat with a 3D printed die. You can with metal, you can't with plastic. I've also learned that I need to do this in a press where you have the really rigid control, pushing the pressure straight down. The other thing is the table and guide I made to put these ribs in, although it worked, wasn't great. And it could be done a lot easier. The reason I'm getting into that is I want to do the cargo floors. They're the same length as this, but they're quite a bit wider. And it's just solid ribs and lots of stampings, termination stuff in them. So I won't be able to do those, and it's not going to work with the way I had it set up. So what I'm going to do is some retooling. I'm making a proper aluminum table for the bead roller with a sliding guide. So you'll be able to clamp the piece of material to the guide and then just crank the dies together, crank the bead roller, and it'll slide back and forth, keeping it perfectly straight. That'll make it easy to put these ribs in, and if the bigger floor panels, I'll be able to do the ribs easily also. So that's one thing I need to do. The next thing, I need to be able to press these in, and my press is not wide enough. So I'm going to widen my press out. I'll widen it out to about 34 inches. And I'm also going to make it so that the jack that's in it can be slid, either slid or have multiple positions. I'll try to make it slide if I can. And that way I can do a press at the very edge of the panel. For instance, on this section here, it should have had this die here pressed into it. So when I make the next one, I will be able to bead roll, but I won't go by these spots. So I'll be able to clamp it in my guide, run the roller down, roll a section, lift it, move it further down, and do it again. And I'll be able to quite easily make these in a nice straight lines. Then I can press the dies in. And I know that the press works well. These plastic 3D printed dies work very well in the press. And this 20 gauge steel, so it works quite nice. And also the end termination for these ends. And the nice thing about a 3D printed die is you can get the perfect shape, so it just matches exactly. So this episode was a failure, but I've learned a lot from it, and I have a way forward. I know where I'm going to go with this. Tooling changes and changes the process, and I'm very confident that I can make a good panel when I'm done. I'm also quite confident now about the floor panels. Once I make these changes, I think I'll be able to make the floor panels quite easily also. The next few videos, I'm not going to see a lot of progress on the bus. Summer here, it's very hot, very humid, and it's a little uncomfortable working in the shop, so I got other things I like to do. But I do want to put a video out every 2 weeks. I think the next video will probably be on my tooling. I got to do some modifications to the press and the bead roller, and I got tools I've made and things I've modified to make work. Basically how to do this on the cheap, so might be interesting to some. This is a very expensive hobby if you have to buy good quality tools. Well, keep watching for some video of the work being done and some detailed video of some of the parts. And well, thanks for the comments. I appreciate them, and thanks for watching.